environs of the Civic Center and High School and Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the first African-American institution established in this city. A short way south, a Venice enclave also forming was considered part of this early Santa Monica African-American community. Next slide. In the years surrounding Phillips Chapel's 1908 purchasing of its own building at 4th and Bay Streets, the oceanfront area down the hill around Pico Boulevard, south a few blocks to Bicknell Street, emerged as a gathering place where African Americans from all over the Los Angeles environs and beyond came to enjoy the beach's pleasures. While the boundaries shifted through time, it was a popular destination for many African Americans into the early 1960s. Next slide. Area establishments provided services and accommodations for African Americans from Santa Monica and elsewhere, particularly those who came to enjoy the Pacific Ocean a few blocks away. Black regional residents and Los Angeles entrepreneurs attempting leisure space service business development for their community were challenged by various white supremacist private hoarding of benefits and public policy measures inhibiting residential expansion and economic development close to the Pacific Ocean shoreline. Next slide. An example of this occurred in 1922 when a Black investment group led by Norman O. Houston and Charles Darden was blocked from developing a first-class resort and amusement facility along the oceanfront at Pico Boulevard. After they abandoned the plan, the property was purchased by white developers whose plans were approved, facilitating the construction of the iconic Casa del Mar Club, now a hotel, and another beach club, the Edgewater, now the hotel shutters on the beach, all before 1930. Next slide. Another high-profile act of white supremacist sabotage of African-American coastal zone businesses occurred in the 1950s when Santa Monica city authorities rushed in to take over land through eminent domain proceedings for a purported parking lot, forcing Black investors to abandon the Ebony Beach Club project. These investors put up a giant sign asserting racial discrimination and tried to stop the city's proceedings in Superior Court, but lost. Now, the upscale Viceroy Hotel sits on the proposed Ebony Beach Club site at Ocean Avenue and Pico Boulevard. The city continues to own this site and derives economic benefit from the hotel's revenue and occupational taxes and occupancy taxes. A similar deal could have been done with the Black investment group. Next slide. The African-American community of strivers, homeowners, and renters was pushed further inland due to the impacts of displacement from waves of urban renewal infrastructure projects and anti-Black housing practices. In contemporary times, this community has mattered in the reclamation of place and memory in history and heritage conservation programming that has been initiated by citizens and public officials. Local and national landmarking of Phillips Chapel and the Bay Street Beach Historic District, respectively, have engaged the public to learn about Santa Monica's historical African-American experience in U.S. history. Next slide. Other contemporary programming such as Nick Gabaldon Day, California Coastal Cleanup Day, field trips for youngsters from inland areas, and the Belmar History Plus Art Project actively connect African Americans and others to more complex, culturally inclusive stories of our collective national history, heritage conservation issues, beach wildlife appreciation and watershed stewardship, as well as aspirations to environmental justice policies involving beach access issues and social action intersecting with beach recreation. African American youth and those from other marginalized groups living in California inland areas in some of this programming get the chance to have introductory surfing lessons as part of the beach recreation experience, which opens up new ways for them to realize their full potential as human beings. This programming helps to make these local stories more visible and shows the struggle for cultural equity along with social, political, and economic issues reshaped the long freedom rights struggle. Next slide. The Los Angeles, go back a slide, please. Next slide. The Los Angeles Venice district of the California coastal zone, in this area, African Americans began formulation of a small neighborhood around 1910. These landowners and renters first worked for the white-owned amusement business and opened small service businesses. Living a few blocks from the Pacific Ocean, this enclave continues to endure today due to its historical determination and skills of contesting and navigating discrimination. It has experienced waves of gentrification over the last half century. The most recent wave, next slide please, of high-income whites employed in the entertainment and computer technology industry are buying up properties and indulging wealthier and whiter tastes, which have had a more visible impact in marginalization of the Venice district's African American middle class and lower income homeowners and renters. Today, gentrification is not only creating a change in the character of this Venice area by reducing its racial, social, and economic diversity, but city politics are allowing the erasure of the historic legacy of the Black pioneers and their descendant community. Next slide. Public officials such as yourselves need to lead implementation of policies and programming to recognize and maintain this African American residency and legacy in Los Angeles's Venice district. In California coastal cities, African Americans have not obtained the full cultural, social, and economic benefits that could have potentially been developed because of the impacts of discrimination over the decades. They have faced waves of anti-Black discrimination and actions of economic sabotage by white supremacy to diminish Black wealth building from private practices and public policies. People living by the beach have the opportunity to make inroads into ocean sports historically rooted in whiteness in Southern California, which could be important to various types of socioeconomic attainment. African Americans continue to be marginalized in their abilities to experience these opportunities due to lack of access. So, African Americans have contributed to the region's social, cultural, political, economic milieu, and to making the colorful history of California. We have a right to historical and cultural sites, a place in the American identity, and the joys of cultural expression and self-fulfillment, along with access to clean air, clean water, and enjoyment of all of America's natural and socioeconomic resources. Next slide. In closing, all tools of public policy, education, conservation, and curation available must be used to expand knowledge for the recognition of underrepresented and the disempowered in the redefining and reconstruction of a more inclusive public culture, historical memory, and national identity, encompassing diverse experiences of the American people, and to help dismantle institutional racism for greater equity and justice in cultural and socioeconomic attainment for all Californians. I think that the Reparations Task Force can help us do a lot of this with their recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jefferson, for your thorough expert testimony. We really appreciate it. Now we'll turn to artist Price. Price, you may begin your testimony, and you have 10 minutes, and you may begin when you're ready. Thank you so much for your presence.
How y'all doing? I appreciate you all for the opportunity. I definitely, make it short and sweet. My name is Price, Government Larry Lee Jacks Jr. I've been blessed to be a part of the music industry since I was 17 years old. I got my first deal at 17 in the beginning of the streaming era, before it was even a thing, with a big, massive hit called Teach Me How to Jerk with one of my best friends. Since then, I was been blessed to just work with lots of different artists and people in the industry, from Mariah to Brandy to Travis Scott to Wyclef Jean, too many to name. It's been an incredible experience. But it's also taught me a lot of different things, just about business, about being an American African in this country, being an American African in business. It's taught me a lot of different things, and a few things that I learned, and I just wanted to speak about. I'm from the Inland Empire, which is an hour east of LA, for those that don't know. I'm in California, and I've literally lived almost every city out here in the IE. But I was exposed to reparations and racism early. I mean, from 5, 6, 7 years old. On my street, my grandmother lived on Evans in Banning, California. We lived directly next door to a family that were a part of the KKK, a full-fledged, authentic, racist family. Since I was a child, I grew up next door to them, fighting them, all those experiences. And then 2 streets over was the Morongo Indian Reservation, which, we could walk to the reservation. It was walking distance to my grandmother's house. I'm 31 years old now, and I've never been on the reservation, still to this day. The reservation was blocked off by a border, almost like border patrol, a little border, a couple guards, and unless you had an Indian reservation pass, you were not getting on that reservation. I said that, I spoke on that because we went to school with these children. We went to middle school with these children. So we got to experience the total difference in lifestyle that they got to experience, good and bad, right? And so, but for me, it was important because I always used to just think like, dang, it's just small things like being 13 and kids are at school with $1,000, or they're getting limos to school, different, just we got to experience a lot of wild things. And then all of them had the luxury of knowing, hey, when I turn 18 and graduate high school, all I gotta do is graduate, and I got $13,000 coming to me, bare minimum. And I always used to just think that was so strange. I was always just mind blown by that, and I used to wonder, like, well, our people were killed too. Why don't we get anything? This is, my childish thoughts. But it was just like, I got to be exposed to the benefits of reparations and it being a real thing, early. So, saying that, just fast forward now, because I don't want to, take up too much time. My family, we moved, I love one of the speakers who went so deep on her history. She crushed it with her family history in the slides. She did so amazing. I like to draw back to about 2 generations within my family, which started in the Bay Area, San Francisco. My family, my grandmother, my aunties, my uncles, they all were a part of the Jim Jones experience. They were all in the churches. I have cousins and uncles that have nothing bad to say about Jim Jones. because they do not know the man that went to Jonestown and murdered all the people that he did. One of my aunties and one of my newborn baby cousins died in that massacre as well, which inspired me to do what the Queen Erica spoke about, which was get into storytelling. I couldn't agree more with the power of storytelling. It inspired me to write a book and create a book series called Generational Cures. As you can see on the cover, it spells curses, but one of the S's is crossed out. And it's Generational Cures. I'm the first in the series, Lil Larry, but the purpose of this book is to immortalize my family, tell all the different stories of my family members, create financial legacies, build, residual income for my family members that never would have ever think that their stories would have been told. I have family members that became schizophrenic after the massacre. I got family members that became drug addicts, drug dealers, et cetera, et cetera. So my mission, and just briefly, I'm very passionate about legacy. I'm very, very passionate about Black ownership. I'm very passionate about residual income. I'm very passionate about owning shit. Excuse my language, but I'm not here to be all playing games and be all sweet. Own you something. I know we're going to get reparations. This is not something that we're sitting here with 150 participants in a fairy tale world about. This is 1,000,000% going to happen. And the key that I believe is very important right now is financial literacy and building that as much as possible within our communities. I'm very passionate about that in the music industry. I'm very passionate about spreading the awareness of reparations in the music industry. You'd be surprised how many American Africans in the industry don't realize what they have coming to them, and what they should be fighting for, what they should be spreading awareness for, even within our industry. So many American Africans that are millionaires that can, really help push the agenda, and they just don't know. They really don't, because it seems like a fairy tale. They weren't exposed to what I got to see as a child and see is a reality. Like, no, this isn't a fake thing. People are getting scary amounts of money monthly to do nothing but be who they are based on what, the massacres and the just scary things that happen to their people in this country, and our people experienced 100 times worse. So I don't want to take up too much time. My name is Price. I love all my people. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Camila, for this experience. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just blessed to be hearing all of you all's takes and positions, and I'm here, and I look forward to learning more, becoming more involved in the movement and anything that I can do. And I thank you all for the time.
Thank you so much, Price, for your moving personal testimony. We really, really, truly appreciate it. So now we're going to move to Professor KJ Green. Professor KJ Green, you can provide your testimony when you're ready. Thank you so much.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes. Would you like to be seen as well? If so,
yes.
You can turn your camera on. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it's on.
I don't see your face, so.
Okay, let me try it on this, because I'm using the phone and the computer. Okay, how about now? Is that
yes,
better?
We can see you. Yes,
okay, good,
thank
good.
you.
Okay, thanks. I want to start out by thanking the task force and Camila Moore for putting on this amazing testimony. I've been blown away by the panelists that I've heard. I mean, just brilliant presenters today. So thank you so much for doing this vitally important work. And this is truly history in the making for an idea whose time has come. By way of background, I am a professor in Los Angeles at Southwestern Law School. I live in Hollywood. And prior to becoming a professor, I was a practicing attorney. I've been blessed to represent some very iconic clients as a lawyer, including Public Enemy, Eric B. and Rakim, Bobby Brown, and of course, more recently as a consultant, the great George Clinton, the King of Funk. And I'm going to focus my remarks mainly on the music industry today. I think Professor Darnell Hunt ably showed how segregation exists at really disgusting levels in the film and television industries. So I'm going to talk more about the music industry. So if you will indulge me, I'd like to play a song, and hopefully the technology will allow me.
He dropped. Professor Green, I'm not sure if you're still on, but we can't hear you or see you anymore. I just texted Professor Green. He should be back on shortly. Okay, Professor Green, I see you're back on. Can you hear us okay? Okay, you're back on. We see you, Professor Green. So you wanted to play a song? We see you on video, but we can't hear you if you're trying to speak. Are you trying to speak? We cannot hear you. Is there any way a staff member can assist Professor Green?
Trini or Noel, can you see if you can help Mr. Green? He is listed as a presenter. Let's see.
Mr. Green, it looks like you may have dual monitors. Is that the case?
Doesn't look like he can hear us.
Yeah, I'll try and chat with him on the back end.
Oh, thanks, Trini.
Yeah, he's on the computer and his phone at the same time, so I'm trying to. Is there a way you can just use one device?
I could, but I don't think the computer is affecting it because the audio never worked on the computer. And when I say it says your video is muted on the phone app.
He can hear him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my phone. I can play through my cell phone.
Oh,
Okay.
creative.
Technology is not cooperating.
If you all can hear, I can just use my cell
We can
phone.
hear him.
Yeah, we can hear him.
The song I played was Bessie Smith, and I played it because back in '08 I wrote the first article on reparations in connection with copyright law. And I'm not going to talk much about copyright law today, but I would suggest that I think that there's going to be an interface between this task force and the federal government later. There's tons of work that needs to be done in reforming U.S. copyright law because I call it copyright scandal, the treatment of African American artists under copyright law. So we all know that the American mountain of black creativity, and yet the remuneration awards for that have not been present. One thing that I talked about in my article is that we're not talking about slavery. We're not talking about something 200 years ago. We're not talking about some old problem which doesn't exist today. We're talking about ongoing appropriation of African American music and lack of compensation and credit for that music. The way copyright law works is any work after 1926 is still under copyright. And so all of those works from 1926 going forward, we just saw this with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was done on Netflix. That was Ma Rainey is now in the public domain. But the value of these astronomical. Know that many of the artists who created this work were never compensated and were not even given credit for their work. And I saw that in my conjecture with my work with George Clinton, been horribly treated not only by the American music industry, so by the courts. There's a tremendous judicial ability in our federal courts when black artists come to courts to get theirs. So these are all problems I think that the innovators in science and other fields, Thomas Edison, Bill Gates, now today with computers, Steve Jobs, they all became billionaires. But African Americans, greatest innovators in the American music space, the greatest of them, including Jelly Roll Morton, Bessie Smith, Arthur Big Boy Crudup, they all died so poor that they didn't even have a headstone to be buried with. All of those works that we're talking about are still making money for the American entertainment, and the compensation hasn't been paid, and many times has never been paid. So we're talking about a source of money which is still continuing, and the injustice of it is glaring, right? It's not some problem from 200 years ago. It's a problem that's ongoing and happening today, and I think that that has to be pointed out. The Indian music industry is doing great because of digital distribution. It's great for the labels. It's great for Spotify, Pandora, and the like. Not great for the artists. And so we continue this kind of cycle of black creation, black either non-compensation or undercompensation. I also talk about in my statement how there's a feeding frenzy of companies buying up old black music. They're buying up all these old catalogs. It's movies from the music from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. The hip-hop catalog is for sale. Death Row, the record label, was sold to Hasbro, the toy company, for $350 million, right? And so, and my question is, okay, great. So Hasbro has acquired the Death Row catalog. What about the artists on Death Row? We know that even Tupac Shakur wasn't paid by Death Row. And so all of these assets, which are generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the American music industry and for Wall Street, are racially tainted assets that demand some compensation, and I think California can do that at the state level. They can say that when you're doing these catalog sales, you've got to make sure that the people who actually created this music were paid for it, because they were not. Most recently, BMG, one of the major record labels, did a review of contracts from their so-called legacy artists, black artists. And they found, surprise, surprise, that there were significant disparities in terms of how those artists were paid and how white artists were paid. And BMG is saying that they will now make contract adjustments. The music industry has done that from time to time. This is not reparations, by the way. This is not reparations. This is just giving back money that they were unjustly enriched by. What reparations would look like, in my mind, would be reparations for past injustices, for music, as I said, that is still ongoing and making money. Also, it would include future investments by the American music industry and the entertainment in the African American community, but at the direction of that community. You might have heard that during the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, that Warner Brothers, Universal Music, and Sony all made some contributions to African American organizations. However, I applaud them for that small step in the right direction. However, that is not reparation. To be reparations, there has to be equity in the music industry, including, as Professor Hunt said, in the boardroom and in the executive suite. That's sorely missing. And there also has to be investment in the community itself. I don't want to take up too much time, but let me just say a couple of more things. Everybody knows that the music industry and the entertainment industry, or rather the movie industry, is losing money because their refusal to actually cast movies with diverse casts. In fact, one study found that their refusal to do that is costing them $10 billion a year. So now I want to speak to my friends in the entertainment industry. I have many at record labels, at video game studios, at motion picture studios, because we're going to need allies in this fight. We can't do it alone. And the people I know in the copyright office, these are people of incredible goodwill. They're not racist people who are trying to hold us back. But that's not how institutional racism works, right? It doesn't matter, what's in their heart. It matters that we have this system. I think if they could understand that providing reparation entertainment space actually help them double and maybe even triple their revenues, they'd be interested in that. And the reason I say that is there's this untapped creativity in the African American community. There's fear, there's loathing of even people releasing their works because they know about what a ripoff the music industry is. There's a lot of untapped potential which is there. And if reparations were paid for these past injustices and also as a symbol of good faith of things going forward, the industry would actually make more money. Go on TikTok, go on Instagram. It's all fueled by Black youth. Black youth are fueling the entertainment industry from top to bottom, from fashion, from movies, from music. And so I think one way to get the people on board who we need to get on board is to have them see that, yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's also going to be very profitable. I'm going to close with a quote I put in my statement from Dr. Martin Luther King, great Dr. Martin Luther King. And here's what he said. He talked about reparations, right? In his dream speech, it was right there in there. It was hidden, but it was there. And here's what Dr. King said. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. This is Dr. King on reparations, an idea whose time has come. I've now concluded my opening statement. Thank you for inviting me.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor Green, for your expert testimony, and apologies for the technical difficulties. We're going to move into the question and answer period, which will last until noon, and then we'll part to lunch. And so hopefully we can get your audio together for the question and answer period. If not, I'll just keep my phone on. But I do see from one of your screens, one of the mic is muted, so I don't know if that could help if you tried to toggle it. But I know you already talked about that before, so it's okay. So now we'll move on to the question and answer period. Are there at this time, any members of the task force who would like to make a comment based on the testimony presented, or to ask a question to our esteemed panelists based on the information presented? And if you would like to be recognized, just speak up, because we have a lot of speakers and Blue Jeans doesn't allow me to see everyone. Member Bradford, you are recognized.
I just want to thank the presenters, and especially Professor Green, Attorney Green, for his just closing presentation. As an individual who spent 20 years in and around the music industry, everything that you state is still alive and well today. And I make a great point that, again, paying folks what is owed is not reparations. It's due compensation for the work that they did and that America is still benefiting from. So as a legislator who, like you say, helped with fair pay to play for the college athletes. I was the joint author of 206, making sure those athletes who, the majority of them were African Americans, who put butts in those seats for $1 billion sporting industry. Please let me know what we can do to help further these wrongs, or should I say, correct those wrongs that have happened in the music industry. I just met with Warner Music and Sony just 2 weeks ago because they're concerned about this contracting, this 7-year obligation. So I would love to hear your thoughts on where we are with that issue, if you're familiar with it.
Professor Green, would you like to respond?
Yes. Senator Bradford, is it? Senator.
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to get your title right. Are you talking about the statute, which we have in California, which says that compensation has to be paid for contracts that are 7 years or longer? Yes, but there are, and workarounds around that. One of the things they'll do is they'll just say, because most of the industry is here in California, but there's also substantial parts in New York. One of the ways around that is just to do New York contracts. It's only state law. But I agree, that is a possible avenue to saying, okay, we have to correct these wrongs by saying that retroactively there wasn't correct compensation paid on these agreements. And, BMG did do that study. However, they haven't released the results to academics like me, which would be very, very helpful. Because I no insult to BMG or any record label, but I don't think we just what was actually in those contracts and what the difference is. So one of the things I would encourage, maybe there could be legislation encourage them to release those results. BMG invited every other major label to do the same thing, and I don't think any so far have actually taken them up on that, right? Because they realize that, a lot of these artists weren't paid at the federal level, though. Federal level, most of the time these people can't get copyrights. They couldn't get copyrights in their work, or they had false copyright registration, like Barrett Strong. I have tons of examples of that. So in order to unravel this, it would take a comprehensive look at all these different things, our copyright system, our system of contracts, and also making it a national project ultimately, because I could very easily see Alabama or Utah or a conservative state saying, hey, you don't like California, you don't like the way they're regulating you, come to Utah, come to Alabama. So we need a national dialogue on this as well. Thank you so much for that, Cindy.
Thank you. Would any other member of the task force like to be recognized at this time?
Yes, Camila, it's me, Jovan.
I member Scott Lewis, you're recognized. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everybody for your presentations today. From issues with the NCAA to the music industry and the film industry, what we're seeing is the continuous exploitation of Black labor. That has been a continuous process since emancipation. We've seen the same kind of labor exploitation in new forms. So I want to ask, and we're seeing it also in these, broader circuits. I can't help but think about how, African-American cultural production is at the basis of what we think of as global popular culture. And I see that especially in contemporary practices around, say, South Korean musical production, right? We see the DNA of Black music in, at the heart of that genre. So I think I have a question really, for all of you, but I want to kind of use Professor Green's framework of property, copyright, to think about what broader areas of cultural property, right? How might we think about all of these areas as a domain or within the domain of cultural property, right? Because I think copyright, you're right, Professor Green, and there are limitations, there are challenges. But how do we open up the scope, right? Where I think everything that the presenters have talked about today does fall underneath something of a protection of cultural property. Is there a means by which we can shore up that category? And I'm very curious about that, because once we think about that, then what we have is something that, you know, can be protected. We understand that cultural property, especially in native cultural areas, right, are often very protected. How do we have something like that that can be qualified and can be protected for African Americans?
Dr. Darnell Hunt, would you like to take that question first?
Let me say a few words about that. I mean, I think that's an important point. For me, one of the common threads that unite a lot of what I've heard today on this panel in terms of testimony is really respecting, affirming, reflecting, circulating our humanity. You know, really honoring our experience. Ensuring that it's understood, that it's not misrepresented. That can be through music, it can be through storytelling, it can be through like the way we document history, and you know, that's erased in many cases by people who don't want us to know that history. So for me, that's what it's all about. That's what culture is. It's about respecting and affirming and valuing the experiences that African descended people have had in this country, and what they've had to endure and what they've had to overcome. And all too often, the people who kind of control the process by which those stories, those experiences get circulated don't look like us. And they're often not motivated to tell the stories or to, embrace the music and the other cultural forms in ways that are affirming to us and that celebrate our humanity. And instead, it tends to denigrate us in various ways. It tends to marginalize us. It tends to stereotype us. And it's often exploited for profit on their end, and we don't often get to share in that. Not that we want to share in our own dehumanization, but you know, it's like a double whammy. And for me, that's what kind of unites a lot of what we've been talking about today.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that. Would any other panelists like to address a member Scott Lewis's question around cultural property?
Allison Rose Jefferson. So as I said in my presentation, one of the big things that we need to see to that is done is that we need to have more areas of knowledge production available from the standpoint of archives and collecting materials and what have you, because those are the places where the stories are coming from that are getting presented on television, that are getting presented in movies. And if we don't have those repositories, and if we don't have the scholarly text, then we are at a loss in terms of going forward for how to substantiate making this claim in terms of the Western American system of what is important. And there's lots of materials out there, not to say that, you know, we have to always buy into archives as the way to validate our culture, but it is one way to validate our culture that we don't have enough of. We don't have enough money being put into developing things like this. I mean, we have our major cultural institutions in terms of UCLA, in terms of California, UCLA, and other places, but we don't have any real dedicated archives in California where there's funding that is being developed. So that's something that the Reparations Task Force should, you know, look into. We don't have as many displays in terms of public displays, monuments, those kinds of things, where people can learn about the heritage in terms of the public square. So those are the kinds of things I think, you know, I hope that the task force will, you know, consider in terms of funding.
I'd like to say something real quick. It's Erica Alexander, because I love this conversation. Absolutely, Professor Kevin Green and Senator Stephen and Darnell, it's the truth. one of the things that stops progress the most is that every time we go to make something, we have to pay an arm and a leg to do it. Doing the podcast, many of the things that we looked for were archival, whether it was James Baldwin or Malcolm X, and they're owned by huge corporations. And it stops us from creating the types of stories we'd like to, documentaries and things like that. People ask why we're outside of those things. Well, maybe because we're not funded, certainly, but also because getting a hold of those types of things, we're often paying people who at the time did record them, but own all of that archival material. And I'd like to say something about the legacy family stuff. Professor Green, we are now trying to do something to produce something about the legacy families, to tell their stories about how these things happen. So it can be a blueprint for other artists to avoid it, and also to create some kind of connection and conversation within the industry so we can stop it. This is generational wealth rape as far as I'm concerned. And we just need to be as aggressive as we can toward it. And certainly people are afraid to speak up. They think there's going to be a blowback. They won't be able to do the things they need to do. And also, I just want to say that whatever I can do in that space, I'd love to, because it's probably one of my most frustrating things to see all the work that we've created for the world, the biggest culture makers in world history, as far as I'm concerned, 13% of African Americans, and have very little ownership of it. It's atrocious and it's outrageous, and it needs to stop. So thank you.
Thank you. Member, sorry. Before we go to Reggie Jones Sawyer, Kevin, Professor Green, you wanted to respond, and my mic has to stay on. I'm sorry for any audio issues. Kevin Green needs my audio to respond.
Yeah, I just want to say to Mr. Alexander, said about him, we have to awaken him. And there is going to be pushback against it. There's going to be pushback, and it's because they're going to look at it, I can tell you in the music, exactly the opposite. Yes, I don't know if I could be heard.
Did y'all hear that? Okay, great.
Yeah.
You can, but it's kind of low.
Oh, it was low, Professor Green. Did you just want to repeat quickly?
Sure, quickly. I said, Ms. Alexander, I love what you said about awakening young people. That's going to be a key part of this. And I'm hoping that this committee gets, and this task force gets a lot of publicity. I did reach out to a Rolling Stone reporter who said he was very interested. I don't know if he was able to make it. But you're absolutely right. We have to awaken others, and we have to make them see that this is not something from 200, 300, 400 years ago. This is something that's ongoing and happening today, right, as we speak. And I also just want to acknowledge Dr. Jefferson. I didn't know so many of those things. I'm new to LA. I was just blown away by that history lesson you gave us about discrimination in the leisure industry. Thank you so much.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to add that, being someone who has had to work with cultural institutions and figure out where our family archive was going to be housed, the process was painful. And we were, I don't know, I want to be able to describe this in a way that's still fair, but I think that the work also has to be done around making sure that legacy families have the support that they need to be able to have their materials housed in the right place. I know you know this, Dr. Jefferson, but the Mamie Clayton archive, which was one of the biggest, at least on the West Coast, also, is now at Dominguez Hills. And so we do have spaces were private that belong to us. We also have this in church basements and, at grandma's houses. So we have already been collecting and preserving our story as best as we could. I do think that the goal is then to make sure that we have ownership and support to keep those archives in a place that's cared for by us and not just by the state and all these government institutions that are sharing what they think is important and not us.
To my point, why the task force needs to put some money into this area.
Thank you.
I would just quickly add, the task force will not be funding this. That would be a challenge of the state of California. And
yes,
I think that's what Mr.
but you will be presenting ideas to the state of California legislature, and hopefully the ideas that you present to them will be implemented. Thank you, Senator Bradford.
Thank you so much. Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
And this has really been a good conversation. This really didn't, let me put it this way. I remember watching television one day, and Paul McCartney, the Beatles, kind of made a remark about the Rolling Stones being a very good blues cover band. And it struck me like, what did that mean? And then I started investigating blues singers. And I realized a lot of their songs came from our blues, African-American blues legends that they made popular, and they became superstars, making millions, possibly billions of dollars off of I think the word had been used, the treasure of our people and what they did. And they didn't get paid for it. And I saw I started researching and found out they didn't get paid for a lot of the things that they did. And there were even white jazz musicians who tried to take responsibility or take claim that they did the music. And I just remember from 1984 when I was in college reading from George Orwell, where he said, "He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past." So as long as they can control the scenario of what the entertainment industry is, it becomes very difficult for us to get full, not only equality, but I would love to work with someone to come up with a methodology that at the very least, we get the full acknowledgement for what our people has contributed to this industry, and that it's almost like it's been covered up, like the Tulsa massacre. I don't really want to put it to that level, but I feel like it's to that level that our contributions have been pushed down so that others can be lifted up. And so if we don't lift up our own people, and I don't know what form that is, and I'll work with Senator Bradford and I, because we're probably the only two on here that can possibly do something statewide, to try to come up with, whether it's an institute, a methodology, but also financially, how can we make sure that the people who've exploited this, that we can get that money back into our community so we can create more Jelly Roll Mortons in the world and individuals like that who are considered the father of jazz. How do we do that and do that in a substantive way so that those individuals who have that talent can grow and prosper? I don't know if that was a response or if they just somebody want to say they want to come and work with us or whatever, but we do need to do something.
That's fine.
And if I can piggyback on that. Go ahead, I'll stop. Go ahead. No,
please, go ahead, Sidney.
I just want to piggyback. On the archival discussion, and that's critically important. And one of the things that I will be working on, along with the Black Caucus, will be working on as a priority next year, is Allensworth. Not only is that an historical town that was taken from African Americans, but it has to be archived. People don't understand the importance of Allensworth and the fact that it's a state park. But if you visit it today, it's at best a ghost town. So those are the things that this Legislative Black Caucus will be working on in conjunction with this task force. When you talk about archiving our history, we have a phenomenal Secretary of State who's responsible for us being here today, it's in the Secretary of State's department and office that is responsible for state archives. And I know this is a priority for Dr. Weber to make sure that our stories are better told historically as far as land, contributions and all that. So we're in a perfect situation right now, and to come up with some clear, concrete solutions and directives But the timing is right, and all what you're saying is vitally important, that we do need to document our contributions and try to right some of the wrongs that have happened. So the Black Caucus is committed to that.
Yeah, I'll commit UCLA and our group that does the Hollywood Diversity Report. Anything you want to know about Hollywood and ways that we can again document Black contribution to Hollywood and lack of recognition, we're willing and able to kind of work with you on that.
And may I say one thing? I really have to say this. I've been talking about it a lot. It's the ongoing inequity of pay inequity. And Monique talked about it a little bit with her Netflix so-called scandal. But what she was talking about was what Lilly Ledbetter was talking about. And if we are tied to algorithms that are inherently racist to our pay and all sorts of things that judge us for being not worthy of higher salaries, you have people like Octavia Spencer Steele and Viola Davis saying how little they make considering their contributions, and next door to people who have done less and achieved less. We've done that over the years all over the place, and there needs to be data studies that disrupt this, investigations that reveal this bad behavior, the continued epic salary disparities. They plague, they limit our success, and it's a big issue. And we also must look to the fact that we are losing our artists, Michael Jackson, Whitney, Prince, all these things, to the type of health disparities and drug situation, which I think is reparations work. There's a lot of things that contribute to those types of things, and one is them not being able to have access or money access and things like that. You're talking about some of the larger ones, but there are tons of other people who go missing every day. When I say missing, they just fall away, and it's a talent drain. And so that would be great for data studies to just go in there and reveal it. I think it would blow people's minds to see what newcomers make right next to people who've been in it for years and who've built this billion-dollar business alongside and cannot get the salaries they deserve or the attention they deserve or the marketing or the branding they deserve right next to people who are pushed forward every day. So there you go. I'm glad I got a chance to say that.
So thank you so much. We have one last question from member girls, and then we'll get last comments from the panelists.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists for all that you've shared this morning. This question is for entertainment and sports panelists, but it is actually relevant to the leisure industry as well. There was a pioneering Black men of the Yale class of 1970 study done by a Harvard professor, and he found something very abnormal. At a deeply disturbing rate, they were dying off by around age 60. Among the 32 African-American men of the Yale class of 70, the death rate appears to be roughly triple that of their white classmates. And there's one concept that kind of captures what might be going on to some extent, John Henryism, which is a determination among these men to succeed even at the cost of their health. So applied to today's topic, at the request of Black leadership in the Location Managers Guild and also some consulting I did with a couple of production companies, I was really struck by the intense level of racism-related mental anguish and emotional distress experienced by Black folks in trying to do their work in the midst of all of the things that you have described today. My question is, are you aware of any studies, and can you then send them to us, studies or findings similar to what was found in the Yale Black Men study about the psychological and or physical health harm and quality of life harm, like substance abuse problems, family disintegration, resulting from these types of issues that you've shared today?
Any particular panelists like to take member girls' question?
Well, I can't speak to specific studies, but I have a colleague at UCLA, African-American sociologist who works in public health, who studies the stress associated with racism, discrimination among upwardly mobile, middle-class, manager-type people. In other words, the finding was that in some cases, the stress they face is even more severe than working class blacks face, because they're actually working in environments with other with white people who create all kinds of anxieties and pressures, microaggressions, and things like that associated with the status that they've attained. So when you talked about the Yale graduates, I mean, that immediately, I immediately thought of her research, because I think it speaks to what may be going on with them. And stress, as you know, is like a precursor to all kinds of disease, hypertension, heart disease, you name it. So that's an important issue. I think there is a body of literature out there on that.
I would just say that I think your point is something which needs to be studied further. We certainly. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Dr. Brills, thanks for raising this point. I mean, my work, how all these intellectual property deprivations, they actually hurt people. And they end up destroying their careers as well. So mental health toll is just tremendous. I was listening to the singer who talked about Jelly Roll Morton. I mean, he spent the last years of his life in L.A., actually, wandering the streets of LA, pretty much homeless and indigent. And this is the creator, as Senator was saying, if anybody can claim they created jazz, one person probably couldn't, but it would be Jelly Roll Morton. So, yeah, the toll of this on people is enormous, and I think that's something that's understudied. Because like Professor Hunt, I don't know of any studies that really address that specific issue.
Thank you, Professor Green. So we'll take last comments from Vice Chair Brown. Go ahead. And we're mindful of time. We're 6 minutes over, and so we're going into our lunch period. So Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, members of our task force, and to our, I just say so rare, so gifted panelists. I want to shout listening to all of your testimonies. And I want to underscore one thing along with all the great things you've said. Is we must go back to the scene of the crime, the ground zero of this discrimination, even in Hollywood. It goes back to the Dutch Reformed Church and the Anglican Church, who gave spiritual respectability, distorted respectability, to the notion of race. And as the scripture says, judgment should begin in the house of the Lord. It was religion that buttressed and gave strength to injustice being perpetrated against black folk. Let's move fast forward. I heard one presenter mention about Birth of a Nation, but not many people know that it was Thomas Dixon, a Southern Baptist preacher and lawyer from Charlotte, North Carolina, over there near where Brother Barber lives. I heard the young lady reference Barber. But they don't say enough about the fact that it was Thomas Dixon who wrote that novel, The Klansman. He was the writer that inspired Griffith, D.W. Griffith, to produce that movie, Birth of a Nation. And right now, today, the reason why I would suggest we're not being able to deal with race in America is because the so-called white evangelicals don't know anything about Jesus of Nazareth. They've been about nationalism, racism, colonialism, and all of those isms that have been mean to persons because they're different. So I hope that as we go forth and talking about how we got to this point of there being such injustice is perpetrated against those who are in Hollywood. It all began in the spiritual community and in the so-called church house.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Brown, for that historical context. That's very informative. Are there any last comments from our esteemed panelists at this time? Okay. Thank you all so much for your time and your presence. Namely, I want to thank Arian Edmonds, Dr. Darnell Hunt, Erica Alexander, Dr. Jefferson Price, and Professor KJ Green. We truly appreciate your personal and expert testimony, and we're looking forward to staying connected with you all and building on this incredible work that you all are doing. Without further ado, we will recess to lunch and we will return at 1 p.m. Thank you very much. And also I want to say thank you to those who have been respectful in the chat and who have been using the chat to share links and resources and information. When we return at 1, I just want to make this statement, continue to use the chat positively. We do not condone any harmful rhetoric, whether that's racism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia. We do not tolerate any of that language. And so continue to use the chat in positive ways. And for folks who cannot do that, we respectfully ask you to take that rhetoric offline. Thank you very much. We will reset at 1 p.m. Thank you to our panelists.
See you on the Glow Road.
Thank you.
See ya.
Hi, Chair Moore, Doretha.
Hello.
Great morning.
Yeah, it was great.
That was great. That was just awesome.
Oh, wasn't that? I
It
mean,
was amazing.
we could have foregone lunch for that. That was a great test.
It was riveting. Woo!
Witnesses were really good.
Yes.
So, Sheila, thanks for lighting those folks up. They were terrific.
I think you also invited some folks out too, right? Arian
Not in this
Evans
case.
and
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah. These witnesses are really good. You know, I have to say that, you know, the one that resonated the most with me, they all did, but Erica Alexander about the importance of storytelling. I know in our reparations effort, that was the thing that moved the needle, the personal testimony. And so, you know, for Cheryl, when we do the listening sessions, I thought that was really key. And the other piece of it is in the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the federal and also the state corollary, California's corollary, money was set aside just for the public education part to preserve the archives. And so many films and books and plays and articles have come out of that. I mean, for the money that was set aside, it's really money well spent. So I think that's a good recommendation, the task force.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the witnesses, but when it gets to the point where we make recommendations, I really like that idea has served our history really well.
Excuse me. I'd like to remind the members that we're still alive and we're recording.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So it is 1:03, and the California Reparations Task Force has now reconvened. We'll go on to our next item on the agenda, which is subpoena and information request, review, discussion, and possible action item. We will have 45 minutes, so up to 1:45 p.m. for this particular agenda item.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Parliamentarian Johnson?
I just wanted to remind you of having to take the roll in reestablishing the quorum.
Oh, thank you so much, Parliamentarian Johnson. My apologies to the task force and members of the public. I will now call on Parliamentarian Johnson so that we can establish a quorum. Thank you.
Chair Moore?
Present.
Vice Chair Brown? Member Bradford?
Here.
Member Grills?
Present.
Member Grills, thank you. Member Holder?
Present.
Member Jones Sawyer?
Present.
Member Scott Lewis?
Present.
Member Tamaki?
Present.
Member Montgomery Stepp?
Present.
The task force consists of 9 members. 5 members are necessary to have a quorum. There are 8 members present. Madam Chair, a quorum has been reestablished.
Thank you so much, Parliamentarian Johnson. So it is now 1:04, and the California Reparations Task Force has officially reconvened. So we will now go to our next agenda item, which is subpoena and information request, review, discussion, and possible